Joining us now is Haras Rafiq from the counter-extremism think tank, the Quilliam Foundation. Good morning, Haras.
Good morning.
Now, what will this legal challenge mean to universities and colleges when it comes to tackling extremism? We've heard the figure of 70 such meetings being held on campuses, many of them in London. First of all, what's talked about at those meetings and how will this combat it?
Well, essentially what's happening at the moment is that we have preachers, hate preachers who are not breaking the law, but are espousing bigotry and hatred and xenophobia, who are allowed to go and indoctrinate young minds throughout universities without being opposed. And what this bill is actually doing is, first of all, asking universities to think about their own usage of the no platform policy, which they do currently for people who are racist or people who are sexist, etc., in other forms. And if they don't want to use the no platform policy, don't have these people indoctrinating people, youngsters, have them opposed in debate and dialogue so that people can actually make up their own mind with a different variety of views.
So when the universities say that this could involve us having to ban people coming along and speaking freely, you're saying it's not about banning them, just make sure that there is always that there is an opportunity to have a debate with them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best way that the best analogy that I can think of is what happened with Nick Griffin. I had this conversation with somebody at university a few weeks ago, and I said to the person, I said, how would you feel about allowing somebody like Nick Griffin to...
from the British National... Sorry, from the BNP.
From the British National Party, from the BNP, being allowed to do a lecture tour up and down the country at all the universities without being opposed. And he didn't like it. He said, no, we refuse to have it. Well, I said, well, cast your mind back to BBC Question Time when he was on, and there were 4 people who were opposing him. He was exposed, and of course the support for the party actually dwindled. And this is the whole point of what the government is now asking universities to do.
The difficulty, though, Haras, I suppose, must be, I'm sorry to cut in there, but obviously the clock is ticking. The difficulty, though, is, as I understand it, Question Time, the clue's in the name. It's a debate forum. Many of these meetings seem to be, from what we've heard, nothing to do with debate, but all about being lectured at and listening to people and then shuffling out rather quietly.
That's exactly the format at this moment in time, and that's why I say it's indoctrination.
But how would you ever change that, though? If that's the way, if it's like a sermon, if it's like somebody preaching at you, then it's by definition not a debate.
Well, have somebody else on the stage at the same time with an opposing view. That's the only way that this can be tackled.
Realistically, that won't happen. Realistically, what will happen is off campus, these meetings will go on, somebody will hire a room somewhere, and they'll happen there, and we won't even be able to monitor them. Well,
I'm sure, I would hope that security agencies are monitoring people who are potentially radicalising youngsters. However, I think that if we look back to the statistics, at least 8 people who were presidents of Islamic societies at universities have been convicted for Islamist terrorism. And over 40% of the people that have been convicted attained a degree at universities. So there is a problem, there is something going on at universities, and this is one way of actually trying to combat that particular problem.
The other issue seems to be this segregation between men and women at certain times. What about that?
Well, I mean, in our sort of societies, in our liberal secular democracy, we don't sort of promote segregation. We don't promote treating any sex, male or female, in a sort of a derogatory manner and separating them and actually having them at the back or wherever. That's something that we shouldn't tolerate, and I think that's something that has been tackled by most universities, but under the guise of fundamentalism or literalism or conservatism, there are some university societies that have tried to do that in the past and they've been criticised and challenged for it.
And one of the concerns the students' unions seem to have, they say they're not public bodies and therefore not subject to this act. It's confusing, they say, that the government are so focused on our work. NUS is a campaigning organisation, so our opposition to this agenda, and they do oppose it based on both principled and practical concerns, is both valid and appropriate. Surely they have got a point, aren't they? They're not a public body, they're a union.
Well, first of all, the actual legislation doesn't apply to them. The legislation applies to the vice-chancellors, the people who are the chancellors, the principals, people who are actually running the university. They're the people that are actually affected by this legislation. They're the ones that have to stop these hate preachers coming onto their campus. The NUS has decided that they would, in a resolution that they've adopted recently, that they will work with an organisation that supported, called Jihadi John, a beautiful young man, and oppose this prevent strategy, but they haven't proposed an alternative. If we don't have a prevent strategy, we don't actually have prevention of our youngsters being radicalised. We might as well allow them all to go to Iraq and Syria, or allow them to carry out things here attacks here in the UK. We must prevent our youngsters from being groomed and radicalised in the first place, and that's something that I think is a duty for all of us.
Are more of them not now, though, being radicalised online? Is that not where the real danger now comes from?
Hey, the reality is that an individual doesn't go online to buy a pair of shoes or a handbag and end up becoming a jihadist. They have to be looking for something, or somebody has to find them. And if we look at the real data, the empirical evidence, every single person that has been radicalised online to go out and carry out a terrorist attack, bar two, have actually had real engagement with a real individual. And that's something that has to happen, because to go out and to travel to Iraq and Syria, you have to be 100% committed to the cause. And it's very, very difficult to do that online, purely online, and it's very difficult for the people that are in Iraq and Syria to be just recruiting people rather than actually fighting.
But that's a fascinating point you make there, Haras, because we've been told in the past by other organisations working with Muslims, many of them Muslim organisations, full stop, saying that actually, no, it's not the parents' responsibility, it's not teachers' responsibility, this can be done. They say purely in your bedroom online. People are radicalised purely online. You're saying that's not the case?
Well, I won't mention the name, but there was one young girl out of the 3 Bethel Green girls who went to Iraq and Syria early on this year, which was 15. Her father was featured on the BBC with a teddy bear crying for his daughter to come back, and I believe he wants her to come back. But a video was unearthed about 3-4 weeks later where he had taken the young girl, when she was 13, to marches where they were burning the British and American flags and carrying the black flag of ISIL with groups that have now been prescribed as being terrorist entities here in the UK. Some parents may be inadvertently laying the platform, and that's something that Muslim parents need to reflect on, and we all have a duty to do this. We must treat this, and I've said this before, we must treat this phenomenon of Islamist extremism in the same way that we treat fascism or racism, and that's something that civil society has to do together and combat.